COVID-19 resources page for Church Windows. And as we scroll down the page a little bit, we clearly see that we've got a lot of information available. More information as it's released and digested and then, organized in a format from us, we continue to add to this page. Since we did this event last week on these same topics, we've added more documentation here. Because this is new and the country in its entirety has been affected by this, folks, this continues to evolve. So we're trying to adapt with it to help you best adapt to it, okay? So bookmark this page or come back to it. There may be new information that's needed or may be helpful to you in future days and weeks as things continue to develop, okay? So the first thing we're going to look at here is right here, the COVID-19 Payroll for Government Compliance and Tax Benefits Overview, okay? It's a PDF file. So the first thing that it talks about here, of course, is that the whole nation has been affected by the effects of COVID-19 or coronavirus, as it may be, okay? Whether directly or indirectly, we've all been affected by it. Our lawmakers have enacted legislation which is trying to help benefit employers and then subsequently employees as a result, okay? Tracking qualified pandemic payroll and related expenses for preferred treatment is more straightforward now and being dealt with now than trying to reconstruct the information later. That's what we're trying to get you to do now, is to start setting this up and tracking this information as it occurs, okay? There are a number of programs out there. We've got, the Department of Labor's, paid emergency sick leave and, FMLA emergency family and medical leave a benefit from that, okay, that can be reimbursed, okay? There's a link in this document that you can click on, okay? This is probably one of the most important things that you really need to take away from this particular event today, okay, is a new 941 form will be available and in Church Windows Payroll for the second quarter filing. Or even if you don't own Church Windows Payroll, a new 941 for the second quarter will be available on the IRS's website, okay? So there's going to be lots of new information on that as it pertains to COVID-19. So, if you are using Church Windows Payroll, please do not submit the second quarter's 941 without either opening it and verifying that you've got the latest version of Payroll. We're working on getting that patch released now or making it release ready, okay? Because there's going to be, like it says here, about 18 new lines of additional information, particularly as it all relates to COVID-19. So you don't want to submit your 941 for the second quarter without having the new form. So if you have Church Windows Payroll, open it, check and see if you've got that. If not, you can probably go right to the support center or the download current updates page on our website and download the patch. We don't know exactly when that's going to be released and available, but we're working on it as quickly as humanly possible. But of course, we're at the mercy of the government getting that document to us. So I don't even know if we've got it yet, but we will have this document or the new 941 and the patch out as soon as humanly possible after it's available, okay? Yeah, so I'm being told here that we're probably going to have that available by the July 10th, but you won't have it. We won't have it until the 2nd of July, which means we'll have it out probably by around the 10th. But that means you've got about 5 days between the 10th and the 15th, when the 941 is due to get that new form installed and with the patch and therefore get it filed. So there will be some time, but it's going to be, I'm being told it's 7/31. So they apparently, I guess they've expanded that maybe. So in addition to, of course, the new 941, many of you may have had applied for and received a PPP payroll paycheck protection program loan, okay? We're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And, of course, there's methods that we're going to talk about for setting that up, determining how that loan is being spent, and tracking qualified expenses, okay? But we're not going to talk about that right now. We're just talking about this document for the time being, okay? There are definitely qualifying expenses, payroll costs, cost of group health care benefits, retirement benefits, state and local taxes taxes assessed on compensation, rent, or interest on mortgage. There are a number of qualifying utilities, interest on debt incurred. There's lots of things that can certainly be qualified for PPP expenses on that. And it talks about, provided at least 75% of it is used for payroll and related payroll costs, then the loan is more than likely going to be forgivable. However, updated information indicates, again, and can't stress this enough, if you do not have a PPP loan, there is still PPP loan money available, okay? It's calculated at 2.5 times the average monthly compensation for 2019. Back on that page where I was showing you the list of documents, we actually have a calculator document that you can download or you can print, and you can, generate those totals for the, what that actual compensation is to help you determine what your actual amount of your loan you can apply for, okay? So provided it meets the, the spending, the stipulations for the spending of the funds, there's going to be no repayment on that, folks. So if you're struggling, you're not receiving the income that you were before, there's still PPP loan money available, okay? Also, back on that page, there is an SBA-issued loan forgiveness application that you can also then download and complete. I think it's a fillable form that can be submitted to apply for forgiveness. But, again, we're encouraging that Congress has eased some of the original requirements, so you may want to hold off on submitting that because it may make more sense if the payroll threshold hasn't been met, okay? So you want to try to not have to repay some of that back if you can. So they've expanded the window within which PPP loan or qualified expenses occur. So don't necessarily submit that SBA forgiveness form too soon, okay? There's also, finally, retention credits. So for non-profits and employers that did not receive a PPP loan, you may receive a retention credit. We're not going to go into a whole lot of detail on that, but again, review this document, look at that, see if you're not prepared to get a PPP loan, then you may want to see if you can't get a retention credit, based on meeting certain qualifications for that. And again, if my understanding is correct, that'll all be dealt with on the 941. Second quarter's 941 when the new form is released, okay? So yeah, it's saying, changes to the amounts and percentages are already signed, 60% spent on payroll through December 31st, no longer the 75%. Thank you. Okay, so let's go back to our documents here. We've got about 9 or 10 more minutes here. I'm going to try to keep this within 20 minutes. The other two documents that I'm wanting to look at here are, first of all, we're going to look at the second one here, the tracking COVID-19 payroll. So when we click on that, for those of you that don't own Church Windows Payroll, please bear with us while we spend a couple minutes on this. If you have Church Windows Payroll, we recommend that you set up ways of tracking the payroll for COVID-19 payroll as it pertains to PPP. Okay, this document talks about that. Okay, talks about either using the pay labels right here in there in the system administration section. I'm going to open that up momentarily right here. Or if you're using those pay labels for other things and you don't want to change those, then we're going to recommend looking at setting up an allowance for COVID-19 compensation. So I'm going to just close out of the document here, and I'm going to open up or bring up my payroll. And where is it here? There it is. And I'm just going to show you what we mean by that, okay? So in order to track the COVID-19 compensation as it pertains to COVID-19 versus regular pay, we're recommending you go into System Administration, System Profile, and right here, if you're not using it, change this pay label 3, which is normally labeled as additional, to COVID-19 comp or some label accordingly identifying that, okay? Then when we go in and calculate the folks' payroll, we can take out their regular pay, put in their pay amount into the COVID-19 comp, and we can even go so far as to link that COVID-19 comp pay label 3 to a different expense, as we can an allowance as well, okay? So assuming we've got that set up in our chart of accounts, which I clearly do at this point, What I mean by that is when, we're not going in and making changes to people's employee records permanently, albeit you can. But if we go back under system administration and account number setup here, okay, and I find an employee who I've got something set up for, right here under my COVID-19 comp pay label, right here, notice I can link that to a specific expense account that I have set up for PPP loan, okay, for qualifying payroll expenses. So if I click the down arrow next to that, notice I've got an expense set up in my chart of accounts linked to a PPP loan fund called PP loan payroll expense, okay? Same would be true if I didn't use the pay label option, and if I had set up allowances for it, I could come in here and set up and link my allowance to the separate expense that I have set up in my chart of accounts too, okay? So there are lots of options that you have for being able to record the compensation and payroll that's paid to employees that qualifies or is considered PPP payroll expense, okay? So just be aware there's options for that, okay? So with that being said, let's do something real quick. So what will happen is when I want to apply that to a payroll, I would go into my regular calculate payroll. I would enter my pay date and settlement date like I would normally. Let's just choose one of our employees that we know we've got this set up for. So right here, let's say Jimmy, I'm paying him some COVID-19 compensation, okay, not regular expense to the church for record keeping. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out his regular pay over here on the left. I'm going to move it over here to this column in the middle called COVID-19 comp, okay? So I'm just going to edit those figures right here. So I'm going to say, okay, he got paid last week, but he didn't get paid for his regular pay. He got paid for COVID-19 compensation. So I'm just going to zero those out. I'm going to jump over here to the COVID-19 comp column, enter the hours and the pay rate just like I would normally, treat it just like I do normal payroll, and transfer it into accounting, assuming I've linked that and set that up properly, okay? Then from this point, I just process it and transfer it into accounting like I would normally, okay? So again, nothing terribly hard about this stuff. It's just remembering and knowing when and where to use and apply those changes as needed. Next pay, it'll just pop back over to regular for Jimmy, and if I need to and I'm paying him further COVID-19 compensation or sick pay or whatever, I can still make the appropriate changes as needed, okay? So I'm not going to process that pay. I'm just going to cancel out of it. Now we're going to jump over to accounting. With about 4 or 5 minutes left, we're going to talk about setting up accounting tracking on this. So let's get into our church windows here and go into accounting. So the document in question here, let me jump back to our home page real quick, or back to our website. I'm talking about this one right here, the third one down, tracking COVID-19 PP loan accounting, okay? So when we click on that, important to understand that there are two different options here for how this can be set up. There are pros and cons to each. You'll want to spend time reviewing that, okay? So what I mean is right here, option number 1, recommended, okay, versus option number 2. Pay attention to this. Both are not required. You could set them up, but it might be a little more than you need, but it's up to you. This is your data, folks, okay? You can decide which ones you want to do or both. So what the first one talks about is actually setting up an actual fund, okay? So we create a fund in the chart of accounts called PPP fund. Then we would create an income account for the receipt income of the loan amount, and then we would create the applicable expenses, okay? And then we would post during the qualifying period to those expense accounts to make our reporting and tracking much easier and simple for when it comes time to be able to generate those reports and those totals, okay? Option number 2 talks about actually establishing a separate account at the bank for that. I've talked with some folks where the bank has automatically done that for them. They really haven't left them any other choice, okay? Doesn't mean, I suppose, they couldn't transfer it into their general checking, but, if the financial institution the loan was issued through has done that, you could set up number 2. You could do both. It's your choice. But it actually talks about setting up a specific asset account right here, so an account that starts with the number 1, and then you would create an income account with the actual eligible, again, expenses, maybe all linked to something like your general or your operating fund. And then you would run something like your check register, transaction journal, or general ledger for the PPP loan asset to see exactly the activity and the transactions that might be qualifying expenses for that, okay? Again, there are pros and cons to each one of these. Right here, there's the pros and cons for setting up using the loan option. There are the pros and cons right here for using the asset option on that, okay? You decide, okay? Again, this document does also list a list of basic eligible expenses. Here's our payroll compensation. What I'm talking about, folks, is right down here at the very bottom. Payroll compensation, retirement benefits, health insurance premiums and benefits, mortgage interest, rent and utilities, interest on other debt obligations. There may be more, okay? And yeah, we're going to have to get this document updated because it's now 60% of payroll expenses, not 75% any longer, okay? So I want to show what it looks like in Church Windows with regards to how this looks on our chart of accounts. With about a minute left, let me get rid of my drawing here. So when we go back to our chart of accounts, we've gone into the chart of accounts, and if we scroll collapse all down here and we expand our funds, we see down here we've got a fund called 380-100 called PPP Loan Fund Balance, okay? That when we now go to the Tree View tab, it shows we've got an income receipt for the recording of the income loan amount. Then we've got a variety of expenses set up to track those PPP loan expenses, all right? Then we just run, again, the transaction journal or general ledger or a report of that for particular fund, and that tells us exactly what those expenses were as well as the income. Again, look at the pros and cons, and if you have questions or problems with it, let us know, okay? Our church has opted for the number one option with the loan as opposed to the asset, but you decide, okay? Let me see if there's something I've missed here. Again, folks, there's PPP loan money available, okay? Yes. For FFCRA sick pay and FMLA, you're obligated as the employer to keep records of that for up to 6 years, okay? And yes, we do advise that on the accounting you set up for tracking the PPP funds. It just really makes more sense considering that they've relaxed and eased some of the forgiveness requirements on that. Basically, they've given you more time. So if you haven't set that up, folks, set this up, track it. It'll make your life easier in the long run, in addition to anything else you may have set up. So let me just check another couple of things here. Please review the documents on this page, folks. Again, there's not enough time in the event to talk about this, okay? I'm being also told the PPP is required for tracking for 6 years as well, okay? Review this. We're continually updating and adding to this page. There may be more stuff later this week, next month, okay? So as it continues to evolve, from a legislation standpoint, more information is released. We continue to update it. So, all right, I've gone a couple minutes long. I apologize for that. So I'm going to wrap things up there.